One choice. One moment. One love story. Welcome to When He Chose Her. Enjoy the story. They laughed before she ever touched the violin, and that was the most expensive mistake in the room. Friday nights at the Marlowe Room were built for people who wanted to be seen. Crystal chandeliers glowed like captured stars above white linen tables. Waiters moved in polished rhythm. Champagne glasses chimed softly against whispered deals worth more than most homes in Ohio. Outside, rain polished the Manhattan streets in silver streaks. Inside, money wore custom suits and pretended it had manners. Elena Whitmore moved through it all like she belonged nowhere and everywhere at once. Her black server uniform was simple, pressed clean, practical shoes silent across imported marble. She balanced 3 dessert plates on one arm, smiled at table 12, remembered table 9 wanted extra lemon, and gently removed a cigar from table 4 before it could trigger the fire sensors. She did it all without drama. Quiet people often did the hardest work in a room full of noise. At the center booth sat Graham Holloway, 39, billionaire founder of Holloway Systems, owner of enough companies to forget half their names. He wore a midnight blue suit cut so sharply it looked dangerous. His watch cost more than Elena's car, if she had one. He was handsome in the efficient way expensive architecture was handsome. Precise jawline, controlled expression, eyes that measured everything and admired almost nothing. Men leaned toward him when he spoke. Women noticed when he didn't. Tonight he looked bored, which for Graham was more insulting than anger. "Your bourbon, Mr. Holloway," Elena said, placing the glass exactly 1 inch from his right hand. He glanced up briefly. "You people always know where I want things." "Only the predictable ones, sir." The friend beside him nearly choked on his drink. Graham's mouth moved half an inch. For him, that counted as laughter. "Interesting," he said. "I was told this place had personality." "Then whoever told you undersold it." She turned away before he could answer. His friends looked delighted. Graham looked challenged. An hour later, the private equity crowd at his table had grown louder. Deals became stories, stories became bragging, bragging became a competition no one could win. Near the lounge stage, a tired pianist ended his final set and began packing sheet music into a leather bag. The room applauded politely, relieved more than impressed. Graham swirled the last of his bourbon and watched Elena pass again with a tray of espresso cups. "Waitress," he called, snapping 2 fingers lightly. Half the room heard it. The wrong half. Elena stopped, turned, and walked back with calm steps. "Yes, sir." Graham pulled a crisp $100 bill from his wallet and held it between 2 fingers like it was a prop. "The piano guy's done. Play something cute for a tip." A ripple of laughter moved across nearby tables. One woman covered her smile with manicured fingers. A man muttered, "Classic Graham." Someone else lifted a phone before his date pushed it down. Elena looked at the bill, then at Graham, then at the polished baby grand under the lights. Her face did not harden. It did something far more dangerous. It relaxed. "Cash first," she said. This time the room laughed with her, not at her. Graham raised an eyebrow and handed over the bill. Confident, efficient. She tucked the money into her apron pocket. "And if I'm terrible, then I bought entertainment. If I'm good," he leaned back. "I don't think that's the risk tonight." Elena nodded once and walked toward the stage. The pianist, halfway into his coat, paused in confusion as she approached. She whispered something to him. He stared, then slowly handed her the violin resting beside his bench, a worn instrument in a faded case no one had noticed all evening. The room shifted. Laughter thinned into curiosity. Graham crossed one leg over the other, amused. "This should be memorable," one of his friends said. "I hope so," Elena replied without looking at him. She stepped beneath the chandelier light. No dramatic pose. No speech. No need. She lifted the violin to her shoulder with the familiarity of someone greeting an old friend. Her chin settled. Her left hand curved around the neck. The bow rose. Even the bartenders stopped moving. Graham smirked. Into his glass. He had seen rich people fake talent before. Charity galas were full of it. Then the first note arrived. It was clean enough to slice the room in half. Heads turned instantly. Conversations died mid-sentence. A woman froze with a fork halfway to her mouth. Graham's smirk vanished before he knew it had left. The second phrase came faster, brighter, impossible in the hands of a server carrying creme brulee 10 minutes earlier. Elena's bow moved like light over water effortless and exact. The old violin sounded suddenly priceless. Sound climbed the walls, curled through crystal, chased itself across marble. What had been a restaurant became an audience. Graham set down his bourbon too quickly and nearly missed the coaster. His friend whispered, "No way." But there was a way. It was standing under a chandelier in practical shoes. Elena did not perform for approval. She played like someone opening a locked door no one knew existed. Every sharp run landed perfectly. Every soft passage held the room by the throat without force. Graham stared, not at the violin now, but at her face. Calm, focused, free of apology. He knew genius. He funded it, bought it, hired it, fired it. But he had never seen it carry dessert menus. When the final note lifted and disappeared into the velvet ceiling, silence remained behind like smoke. Then the room erupted. Chairs scraped back. Hands slammed tables. Even the kitchen staff leaned from the service doors clapping. The pianist was laughing in disbelief. Elena lowered the violin, thanked him with a nod, and stepped off the stage as if she had merely refilled water. Graham was still seated, motionless, staring at the woman he had tried to embarrass for $100. For the first time that night, the richest man in the room looked like he had no idea what came next. Applause followed Elena like warm rain as she stepped off the stage, but she walked through it the same way she walked through everything else that night, steady, quiet, unclaimed by the noise around her. She returned the violin to the stunned pianist, smoothed the sleeve of her uniform, and picked up a tray of untouched cappuccinos waiting near the service station. The room was still trying to understand what it had seen. Graham Holloway was trying not to look like a man who had just lost a private war in public. That was not normal, one of his friends said. Neither is your haircut, Graham replied automatically, though his eyes never left Elena. The table laughed too loudly, grateful for familiar arrogance. It did not help. Across the room, people who had ignored the waitress 15 minutes earlier were suddenly smiling at her, as if they had always known she mattered. A hedge fund manager asked for a selfie. She politely declined and handed him decaf. A social media influencer asked where she had trained. Elena pointed to table 6 and said, "They need ranch dressing." The woman blinked twice and sat down. Graham rose from the booth. When rich men stand quickly, people make space out of habit. He crossed the dining room with the confidence of someone who usually arrived before consequences. Elena was placing silverware beside a fresh reservation when he stopped in front of her. "Miss Whitmore." She did not turn immediately. She aligned the knife with the plate, adjusted the napkin 1 inch, then faced him. "Mr. Holloway, you know my name. Half the city does. The other half owes you money." One corner of his mouth moved. "Play again." "No." The answer landed so fast it felt rehearsed. Graham blinked. "I will pay $10,000. Then donate it somewhere useful." 20,000. Still no. Nearby diners had stopped pretending not to listen. Graham lowered his voice. "Most people would be thrilled. Most people are free to say yes." She lifted a water pitcher and moved past him. He followed, which for Graham counted as exercise. "What do you want?" She filled 2 glasses at table 8, thanked them for their patience, then looked back at him. "An apology? For asking you to play? For assuming I existed for your amusement?" The sentence was soft. That made it sharper. Graham straightened slightly. Men in boardrooms feared silence from him. He had never feared it from anyone else until now. "Fine," he said. "I apologize." With eye contact, the couple at table 8 suddenly found their salads fascinating. Graham met her gaze. For the first time all evening, he seemed less like a billionaire and more like a student who had arrived unprepared. "I apologize," he repeated. "I was rude." Elena studied him for a long second, as if checking whether sincerity had finally entered the building. "Accepted." Then she walked away carrying the empty pitcher like a trophy no one else recognized. His friend Nolan appeared beside him grinning. "Did you just get performance reviewed by a waitress?" "Go home, Nolan. I live 3 blocks away. This is better." Graham ignored him and returned to the booth, but boredom had left the room without permission. He watched Elena move from table to table, resetting candles, recommending desserts, calming a tourist from Dallas who thought sparkling water should be free because bubbles were air-based. She handled each person differently, and none of them controlled her mood. It fascinated him more than the violin. Talent could be explained. Discipline could be hired. But dignity without theatrics was rare. Near midnight, the crowd thinned. Coats disappeared. Credit cards reappeared. Rain still painted the windows. Graham signed his check, then added a tip large enough to start gossip in 3 boroughs. When Elena picked up the folder, she glanced at the number and slid it back toward him. This is excessive. Consider it an apology surcharge. I already accepted your apology. Then consider it appreciation. She took the pen, drew one neat line through the amount, and replaced it with 20% exactly. Graham starred. You reduced my tip? I corrected your impulse. No one has ever done that. That sounds statistically unlikely. He laughed then, genuinely, the sound surprising both of them. It changed his face. Less steel. More human. Elena noticed and wished she had not. Why are you working here? He asked quietly. Why are you not somewhere with a concert hall and an audience wearing expensive regret? Because this place had an opening. She tucked the checkbook under her arm. Good night, Mr. Holloway. Graham. Good night, Mr. Graham. She turned before he could answer. Outside, the rain softened into mist. Graham stood beneath the awning as his driver pulled up with the black sedan. He did not get in. Through the front window, he watched Elena stack menus and laugh at something the dishwasher said from the kitchen door. It was the first time that night she looked young instead of composed. Sir, the driver asked. 1 minute. Graham kept watching. He had built companies by identifying hidden value before anyone else saw it. Yet somehow, tonight, he had thrown $100 at greatness and called it entertainment. Inside, Elena glanced toward the window and caught him there. Instead of waving, she flipped the sign from open to closed and locked the door. The driver coughed to hide a smile. Graham got into the car at last. Home, sir, the driver asked. Graham looked back once more at the darkened glass. No, he said. Office. I need to find out who Elena Whitmore really is. Across the street, under a borrowed umbrella, Elena stepped out through the staff entrance carrying a violin case no one had seen her take. She spotted the sedan turning the corner and smiled to herself. Too late, she whispered. I'm trying to remember that too. By Monday morning, Graham Holloway had acquired 3 companies, ended 1 partnership, and thought about Elena Whitmore every 11 minutes. He knew this because his assistant tracked productivity in 6-minute intervals and politely informed him he had reread the same contract 4 times. The 42nd floor of Holloway Tower usually obeyed him. Screens glowed. Markets moved. Executives waited outside conference rooms hoping to be summoned and fearing they would be. Today the office felt oddly unimpressed. You are distracted, said Marissa Vale, chief of staff, placing coffee on his desk. I am efficient under unusual conditions. You asked legal if restaurants can be publicly traded. Graham looked up. Can they? That is not the point. She handed him a slim folder. Preliminary search on Elena Whitmore. He took it too quickly. The folder was thinner than his patience. Age 27. Current employment at the Marlowe Room. No active social media. No interviews. No management representation. No performance schedule. No visible debt. No lawsuits. No drama. That cannot be all. That is all public records allow. Marissa studied him. Should I be concerned that a woman with table assignments has become a strategic priority? She is an anomaly. Men often rename curiosity when it embarrasses them. She left before he could reply. Graham opened the folder again. A single old address in Connecticut. 2 years at a conservatory in Boston. Enrollment ended abruptly. Then nothing. For years of almost no trace before appearing in Manhattan hospitality records. It bothered him. People left patterns. Elena left silence. By noon he was in a board meeting discussing a merger worth $800 million while doodling a violin on his legal pad like a confused teenager. Nolan, seated across the table as minority investor and full-time nuisance, saw it immediately. Is that a swan? Graham slid the page over. Speak once more, and I will dilute your shares. Nolan grinned. It is the waitress. She is not the waitress. Interesting correction. After the meeting, Graham canceled lunch and sent his driver downtown instead. The sedan stopped outside a narrow brick building on West 23rd Street, where the conservatory records listed Elena's former instructor. Rain had returned in a fine gray mist. New York specialized in making expensive men look reflective. Professor Arthur Bell opened the studio door wearing wool slippers and the expression of a man who had already judged everyone. No students today. I am not a student. Then definitely no students today. Graham handed over his card. Belle glanced at it. I do not care about money. That makes two of us this week. The professor snorted despite himself and let him in. The studio smelled of cedar, tea, and stubborn standards. Old concert posters lined the walls. Graham asked one question. Elena Whitmore. Belle became still. Why? Because she works in a restaurant and plays like history owes her something. Belle looked at him for a long moment. That sounds like Elena. He poured tea into two mismatched cups. She entered here at 19. Perfect ear. Terrible patience. Could hear flaws in. Tuning from the hallway and flaws in people from farther away. Why did she leave? Because talent does not always survive betrayal. Graham waited. Belle noticed and almost smiled. You are used to people continuing when silence appears. Usually. Then this will be educational. The professor Saturday, her manager mishandled family funds. Promises were made. Debts appeared. Her mother became ill. Elena withdrew from performances, sold nearly everything, and vanished before the gossip could enjoy itself. She never came back? Once. Belle pointed to the corner where an old violin stand sat empty. She said applause had started to sound like invoices. Graham absorbed that quietly. It was not the kind of sentence he heard in his world. Can she still perform professionally? Belle laughed softly. Can the ocean still make waves? Back in the car, Graham stared at the city sliding past wet windows. He knew collapse, scandal, reinvention. Markets rewarded all three if timed correctly. But Elena had chosen obscurity over compromise. He found that more impressive than any headline he had ever bought. That evening he returned to the Marlowe room without a reservation. The hostess brightened, then saw Elena across the room and brightened more. One moment, sir. Elena approached carrying menus like shields. We are full. I can wait. That would be new for you. I had a meeting with Professor Bell. For the first time, she lost half a second. It was enough. You had no right. Probably true. Did he also teach you boundaries? No one has managed that yet. She exhaled through her nose, fighting a smile she refused to grant him. Table 17. 90-minute limit. You are giving me a table? No. I am containing the problem. She seated him beside a pillar with partial visibility and no social prestige. It was the worst table in the room. Graham sat like a man receiving a medal. Throughout dinner, he watched her with less arrogance and more attention. She joked with a tired nurse, helped an elderly couple read the menu, and carried herself with the same grace she had shown on stage. Nothing about her seemed performative now. That unsettled him further. When she brought the check, he asked quietly, why hide? Elena placed the folder down. Why advertise? People would pay to hear you. People pay to hear many things. She met his eyes. Not all of them are worth saying. Then let me invest in a concert. No strings attached. She looked at him, then at the terrible pun he had accidentally made. You should be arrested for that sentence. He laughed. She did too, briefly, before remembering herself. Good night, Mr. Holloway. Graham. Good night, expensive Graham. She walked away before he could answer. Graham signed the check, left exactly 20%, and realized something new and deeply inconvenient. He no longer wanted to win. He wanted to be invited. The next week, Graham Holloway did something more shocking than losing an argument to a waitress. He changed his schedule for someone else. By Thursday evening, he had moved 2 investor dinners, delayed a product launch call with Singapore, and told 3 people the phrase "not now" with unusual politeness. At 7:15, he entered the Marlowe room carrying no entourage, no visible ego, and a rectangular black case under one arm. The hostess nearly applauded. Elena saw him from across the room and closed her eyes for one measured second. Why do you look like a man bringing trouble in premium packaging? She asked when she reached his table. I brought dessert. That is a violin case. I said what I said. She crossed her arms. You cannot keep appearing here like an expensive weather pattern. And yet I persist. He gestured to the chair across from him. Sit for 5 minutes. No, I ordered soup. That changes nothing. I ordered 2 soups. That changes confidence, not policy. Graham opened the menu and looked wounded in a highly curated way. You are remarkably difficult to impress. You are remarkably committed to making it your hobby. She turned to leave. Professor Bell says your phrasing in the Bach partita used to make grown critics emotional. She stopped, slowly, then turned back. You spoke to him again? He called me a decorative inconvenience. I think we are building trust. Her expression fought between annoyance and laughter. Annoyance won by a narrow margin. "What do you want, Graham?" He lowered his voice. "A chance to do one decent thing without being charged interest for my personality." That landed somewhere she did not expect. Elena set down her order pad. "5 minutes," she said. "And if this is manipulative, I am charging you for emotional labor." She sat. He slid the black case toward her. "Open it. If there is a tiny violin joke inside, I am leaving." She unclasped the lid. Inside rested a beautifully restored antique violin, maple glowing amber beneath the lights. Not flashy, not decorative, chosen by someone who had finally asked an expert. Elena did not touch it. "It belonged to a retired principal player from the New York Philharmonic," Graham said. "He wanted it used, not displayed." "You bought a violin to impress me." "No, I bought a violin because your current one sounds brave and exhausted." Her eyes lifted sharply. "You noticed that?" "I notice more now." For a moment, the room seemed quieter around them. Then Elena closed the case gently and pushed it back. "No," Graham stared. "You reject luxury faster than regulators reject my mergers. I reject leverage disguised as generosity. It is a gift. Nothing for men like you arrives without hidden fees." The words were calm, but old pain stood behind them. Graham nodded once. "Fair." He sat back. "Then I will keep it until you trust me. Do not hold your breath. I have trainers for that." She almost smiled. Almost. A server rushed over. "Elena, table 12 says their steak is underdone." She stood immediately. "Duty first." Graham watched her move across the room and solve the complaint in under 60 seconds with warmth, precision, and an extra side of potatoes. Leadership, he thought, often wore an apron. Later that night, as rain tapped the windows again, the restaurant lights dimmed for the final hour. A charity committee entered unexpectedly, loud and frantic. Their featured violinist had canceled for a gala fundraiser happening 1 block away in 45 minutes. Tickets sold. Donors seated. Program ruined. The committee chair recognized Graham instantly. "Mr. Holloway, you sponsor the Arts Foundation. Can you help?" Graham glanced toward Elena. She was carrying coffee to table 9, pretending not to hear every word. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "but not by ordering anyone." He crossed to the service station. "There is a gala next door. Children's music scholarships. Their performer canceled. That sounds unfortunate. They need someone extraordinary." "Then call someone extraordinary." "I am looking at her." Elena kept polishing a glass. "No, it is 10 minutes of music. No, it funds lessons for kids who cannot afford them." The glass stopped moving. He saw it. "That was manipulative," he admitted. "Better quality than usual, though." She set the glass down. "You always assume people can be moved like assets. I am learning some people should be invited instead." She looked at him for a long time. Then toward the anxious committee. Then at the old violin case still resting on his table. "One piece," she said. "And if anyone introduces me with dramatic adjectives, I leave." Graham exhaled like a man spared by a judge. 20 minutes later, the ballroom next door glowed gold with donors, candles, and polite disappointment. Murmurs drifted through the crowd until Elena walked onto the small stage in her server uniform, hair still tied back, practical shoes unchanged. Some guests looked confused. Graham stood at the rear of the room beside the doors, hands in pockets, strangely nervous for someone not performing. Elena opened the borrowed case, lifted the violin, and without introduction began to play. The first phrase silenced crystal and conversation alike. Wealthy people who believed they had heard everything discovered they had not. The melody moved through the ballroom with grace, an ache, and something brighter beneath both. Graham watched the audience change one face at a time. But he watched Elena more. She was not hiding under chandeliers now. She was reclaiming space. When the final note faded, the room rose to its feet. Elena lowered the violin and looked directly at Graham across the distance. He did not clap first. He bowed his head. Small. Sincere. Enough for her to see. Back in the hallway, she handed him the instrument. "Still." "No," she said. "To the violin?" "To the assumption that gifts solve everything." She stepped closer, just enough to unsettle his heartbeat. "But thank you for asking this time." Then she walked away toward the kitchen doors, leaving Graham in a corridor full of applause that somehow felt quieter than her footsteps. Some people hear applause and become addicted to it. Elena Whitmore heard applause and went home to check on her mother. The morning after the charity gala, Manhattan woke beneath a pale winter sun and acted as if nothing unusual had happened. Taxis argued with traffic. Coffee lines formed like prayer circles. Men in expensive coats rushed toward meetings they would later claim could have been emails. In a third-floor walk-up on the Lower East Side, Elena stood at a small stove stirring oatmeal while reading prescription instructions twice. Her apartment was narrow, clean, and honest. Plants on the windowsill. Second-hand bookshelf. Violin case near the radiator. No room for vanity. Her mother, Claire Whitmore, sat wrapped in a blanket at the kitchen table, silver beginning to soften her once golden hair. Illness had made her thinner, not weaker. "You were on television," Claire said, amused. "Local morning segment. They called you mysterious." Elena placed the bowl in front of her. "That is reporter language for unavailable. They also called the billionaire handsome. That is network language for funded." Claire smiled into her tea. "Do you like him?" "I tolerate him strategically." That was not the question. Elena kissed the top of her mother's head and reached for her coat. "I am late for work." At Holloway Tower, Graham was also being questioned by someone who enjoyed it too much. Nolan lounged across a leather chair in Graham's office, eating almonds he had not been offered. "You sponsored a scholarship gala, stood in the back like a lovesick gargoyle, and then left before dessert. Explain yourself." "I do not explain myself to men who wear loafers without socks in December." Deflection. Serious symptoms. Graham signed 3 documents without reading Nolan's face, which was usually enough. "Not today." "You like her," Nolan said. "I respect her." That is billionaire code for panic. Graham finally looked up. "She does not care who I am." "Exactly. You found the one immune to branding." Later that afternoon, Graham visited the Marlowe room earlier than usual. The dining room was empty except for polished glassware and afternoon light stretched across tables. Elena was reviewing inventory with the manager. She noticed him instantly and looked unimpressed in a way he was beginning to find elegant. "We are closed until 5. "Good. Then you cannot charge me for staying." "I can absolutely charge you for staying." He held up a white bakery box. "Peace offering." "What is inside?" "Cannoli from Mulberry Street." "Bribery with ricotta is still bribery. You know the law so well." She sighed and pointed toward the bar. 5 minutes. "If you become charming, I reserve the right to end this meeting." They sat at the empty counter while sunlight faded against the bottles behind them. Graham opened the box. Elena took one despite herself. "You weaponized pastry," she said after one bite. "I am learning your market." Dangerous progress. For a moment, they were simply 2 people sharing dessert in a quiet room. No audience. No stage. No wealth gap loud enough to interrupt. Graham noticed she relaxed when no one was watching. He also noticed how tired her eyes looked when she thought no one was watching her. "You work too much," he said. "You own buildings. Do not start diagnosing labor." "I am serious." "So am I. Rent is monthly. Medicine is frequent." The lightness left the sentence gently. Graham did not push. That was new for him too. "Can I help?" he asked. "There it is." "What?" "The reflex. See a problem, buy a solution." Sometimes solutions require money. Sometimes dignity requires refusal. She set down the half-eaten cannoli. "My mother needs care. I need work. That does not make me a project." The words were not angry. They were protective. Graham nodded slowly. "Understood. Do you?" "Not fully. But I am trying." Silence sat between them, less hostile than before. Then the manager hurried in holding a stack of envelopes. "Elena, this came for you." She opened the top one and frowned. "Medical. Billing notice." Another envelope. "Final reminder." Another. "Insurance dispute." She stacked them quickly, embarrassed by paper. Graham looked away on purpose. Respect sometimes meant pretending not to notice what hurt someone. Elena inhaled once, steadying herself. "I need a minute." She walked to the service hallway. Graham remained seated, hands still. 10 months earlier, he would have solved the problem by transferring funds before anyone finished speaking. 10 months earlier, he would have called that generosity. Now it felt like theft if it bypassed consent. He stood, crossed to the manager, and asked quietly, "How many shifts has she covered this month?" "Too many," the manager whispered. "She never complains." "I did not ask if she was remarkable." "Then yes. Too many." Graham nodded and left without another word. That night, after close, Elena climbed the apartment stairs carrying groceries and fatigue. On the kitchen table sat a sealed envelope with no name. Inside was a letter from the hospital stating Claire Whitmore had been approved for an emergency private patient assistance program through concierge care, covering 6 months of treatment. No donor listed. No publicity. No signature. Elena stared at the page for a long time. Claire watched her carefully. Was it him? Elena folded the letter. I do not know. Do you want it to be? Elena looked toward the window where city lights blinked like distant thoughts. I want to dislike him more consistently. At the same hour, Graham stood alone in his penthouse kitchen failing to make tea. Marissa entered, took the kettle from him, and fixed the situation in under 30 seconds. You used the charity foundation, she said. Anonymous medical grant. Efficient. Was it wrong? No, she handed him the cup. But you look terrified. She will know. Then perhaps do something radical. What? Marissa almost smiled. Earn the gratitude you cannot purchase. Graham stared into the steam rising from the tea. For the first time in years, money had solved something small and nothing important. Kindness done in secret has a way of being discovered by the one person you hoped would never know. 3 days after the hospital letter arrived, Elena Whitmore stood in the service hallway of the Marlowe room, holding her phone with narrowed eyes and dangerous calm. On the screen was the name of the private assistance fund that had covered 6 months of her mother's treatment. Public records showed one primary donor, Holloway Foundation. She did not gasp. She did not cry. She tied her apron tighter. In the dining room, candlelight flickered across polished tables while Manhattan practiced elegance again. Graham Holloway entered at 7 sharp, expecting resistance, hoping for progress, and wearing the expression of a man who had prepared 3 opening lines and trusted none of them. Elena intercepted him before the hostess could speak. Walk with me. That sounds promising. It is not. She led him through the side corridor, past stacked linens and a humming ice machine, into the empty afternoon events room where staff meetings were usually held. She closed the door softly. Somehow that was worse than slamming it. Graham glanced around. If this is where you fire customers, I respect the process. She held up her phone. Did you pay my mother's medical bills? Not all of them. Graham. He exhaled. I funded a grant. The hospital approved the rest. Without asking me. If I had asked, you would have said no. That was my right. Yes. He met her eyes. And helping her was mine. The room went still. Elena looked at him with anger sharpened by gratitude she did not want. You do not get to climb into people's lives through locked windows. I know. Do you? I am learning that every lesson with you is expensive. She almost smiled and hated herself for it. You cannot solve me. I am not trying to solve you. Then what are you trying to do? The answer arrived before he could edit it. Be useful to someone I cannot stop thinking about. Silence. Honest silence this time. Elena looked away first. That was annoyingly sincere. I had no time to polish it. She paced once, then faced him again. I should be furious. That seems likely. I am. Also fair. And yet my mother can breathe easier because of you. Graham nodded slowly. Then be furious tomorrow. She stared at him another second, then laughed despite herself. It escaped suddenly, warm and brief, surprising both of them. You are impossible, she said. I have heard premium versions of that. Before she could answer, the events room door burst open and Nolan stepped in carrying 2 garment bags and no survival instinct. Excellent, you are both here. I need opinions. He froze at the tension in the room. Am I interrupting emotional taxation? Leave, Graham said. Counteroffer, Nolan replied. Attend my charity board dinner tonight because my celebrity guest canceled, and I stopped speaking for 10 minutes. Elena folded her arms. 10 minutes sounds fictional. Nolan placed a hand over his heart. Madam, I am capable of growth. Graham turned to leave. No, Nolan blocked the door theatrically. The donors want Holloway. The sponsors want press. The Violin Society wants culture. I have none of these things. He looked at Elena and brightened. Wait, you are culture? Absolutely not, she said instantly. Nolan pointed between them. Then come together and save the evening. I love solutions with chemistry. We are not chemistry, Elena said. We are litigation. Nolan grinned. Even better. 2 hours later, through manipulation so transparently it deserved awards, Elena found herself in the back seat of Graham's sedan, wearing a simple navy dress borrowed from the restaurant manager, while Graham sat beside her adjusting cufflinks like he had not engineered any of this. "You planned this," she said. "I predicted Nolan. That is the same thing with better tailoring." He glanced at her and forgot his next sentence. Elena noticed. "Careful. Compliments from billionaires often come with hidden fees. Then consider this one free." He paused. "You look beautiful." She turned toward the window too quickly. Suspiciously smooth. I panicked and told the truth. At the Midtown Hotel ballroom, donors sparkled, cameras flashed, and Nolan immediately abandoned them to greet a senator. "Coward," Graham muttered. Elena took in the chandeliers, floral towers, and people performing generosity at high volume. "I used to know rooms like this," she said quietly. "Then let us improve this one," Graham replied. Throughout dinner, he surprised her by being kind without display. He spoke gently to servers. He remembered a janitor's name from a previous event. He redirected praise toward scholarship students seated near the stage. When one nervous 12-year-old violin finalist dropped her fork, Graham crouched, picked it up, and asked if she was excited to play. Terrified, the girl whispered. "Perfect," he said. "That means you care." Elena watched him differently after that. Later, when the host announced a last-minute guest performance request to encourage donations, Nolan somehow had a microphone already in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we are honored by a remarkable musician who taught us all not to judge by uniforms." Elena turned sharply toward Graham. "If you knew this was happening, I will throw bread." "I swear on my least favorite company, I did not." The crowd applauded. A violin was brought to the stage. Elena stood slowly. "You could say no," Graham said. She looked down at him. "I know." Then softer, "Only for him. I am choosing not to." As she walked toward the lights, Graham felt something rare and deeply inconvenient. Pride that had nothing to do with himself. The room expected background music. What it received was a reckoning in perfect pitch. Elena Whitmore stepped onto the ballroom stage with the calm of someone who had already survived worse than wealthy strangers staring at her. Crystal lights glimmered above rows of round tables dressed in satin and donation cards. A string of city skyline windows framed the night behind her. Men adjusted watches. Women leaned forward. Phones rose discreetly, because even generosity liked content. Graham Holloway remained seated near the front, suddenly aware that he wanted the room silent for reasons he did not fully understand. Elena accepted the violin from the event coordinator, tested one string with a gentle turn of the peg, then glanced once toward Graham. It was not a smile. It was not forgiveness. It was recognition. Then she began. The first notes moved low and warm through the ballroom like light under a closed door. Conversation vanished table by table. Forks paused midair. Waiters froze beside wine bottles. The melody climbed slowly, carrying ache, then courage, then something brighter than both. She was not entertaining donors now. She was telling the truth in a language no one could interrupt. Graham had heard market openings in Tokyo, orchestras in Vienna, keynote speakers praised as visionaries. None of it felt like this. Elena played as if every compromise she had ever made was being returned to her with interest. Nolan, who normally treated silence as a medical emergency, stood motionless near the dessert station with his mouth open. The scholarship finalists by the stage stared with the fierce attention children reserve for miracles they might someday imitate. When the final phrase lifted and faded, there was one clean second of stillness, so complete it seemed expensive. Then the ballroom erupted. People stood. Chairs scraped back. Applause crashed against the chandeliers. Several donors who had come to be photographed giving money were now wiping their eyes and pretending it was seasonal dryness. Elena bowed once, modestly, and tried to step off stage. The host hurried forward with a microphone. "Miss Whitmore, that was extraordinary. Ladies and gentlemen, in honor of this performance, we are reopening tonight's scholarship pledge board." Numbers rose immediately. 10,000, 25,000, 50. Graham watched names appear on the screen and knew exactly what had happened. Talent had done in 4 minutes what fundraising speeches often failed to do in 45. Elena returned to the table and sat carefully, as if applause were something she could wrinkle. "You just raised more money than my keynote last year," Nolan said. "I hate you magnificently." "Thank you," Elena replied. Graham leaned toward her. "You were incredible." You looked shocked again. "I am beginning to think it is my natural state around you." Her laugh came softly this time, easier than before. Dinner resumed, but the room had changed. Donors approached with business cards, invitations, praise polished to a mirror shine. Elena declined each one with graceful efficiency. I am not seeking management. I am not returning to touring. No, I do not want to judge a televised talent competition. One producer offered 6 figures for a holiday special. Elena thanked him and asked if he wanted cheesecake instead. Graham enjoyed this more than he should have. Near the end of the evening, a gray-haired man in a modest tuxedo approached their table carrying himself with quiet authority. Graham stood immediately. Judge Kessler. Theodore Kessler, chairman of the New York Philharmonic Board and known destroyer of mediocre galas, nodded once. Mr. Holloway. Then he turned to Elena. Miss Whitmore, I remember you from Boston. You made a room of professionals nervous at 19. Elena blinked, genuinely surprised. That was a long time ago. Not to those who can hear. He placed a cream envelope on the table. There is a spring benefit concert in 6 weeks. Guest soloist withdrew this morning. If you would consider returning, call the number inside. He nodded and left before anyone could dramatize it. Nolan whispered first. Did music royalty just hand you destiny in stationary form? Elena stared at the envelope without touching it. Graham said nothing. Sometimes respect was knowing when not to speak. In the car afterward, Manhattan slid by in gold reflections and wet pavement. Elena held the envelope in her lap like it might explode. You should open it, Graham said gently. You should stop sounding reasonable. It is unsettling. She opened it. Formal invitation. Rehearsal dates. Honorarium larger than her yearly rent. She looked out the window. I do not know if I can do that world again. Then do not do that world. What does that mean? Do your world in their building. She turned toward him slowly. That was almost wise. Write it down. It may not happen again. The driver hid a smile in the rearview mirror. When they reached her apartment building, Graham stepped out with her into the cold night air. Snow threatened from a low silver sky. He walked her to the stoop, but stopped one respectful step below. Thank you for coming tonight, he said. Thank you for not bribing me tonight. Growth. Minimal, but measurable. She looked at the envelope, then back at him. Why are you helping me? The old Graham would have answered elegantly. The newer one was slower and far less polished. Because when you play, people become better for a moment. He hesitated, myself included. Elena stood very still. Then she leaned down, pressed a brief kiss to his cheek, and stepped back before either of them could overthink it. Good night, Graham. She climbed the stairs quickly and disappeared inside. Graham remained on the sidewalk in the winter air, one hand touching his cheek like it held a stock tip from heaven. The driver opened the car door and said nothing for a full 10 seconds. You may speak, Graham said at last. Sir, the driver replied, smiling. You look poorer and happier. 6 weeks can change a market, ruin a reputation, or teach a billionaire how to wait outside rehearsal halls with coffee. Spring arrived in Manhattan in hesitant layers. Snow retreated. Sidewalk trees remembered green. The city traded winter coats for optimism and allergies. Elena Whitmore now spent mornings at the New York Philharmonic rehearsal space, afternoons helping her mother, and 3 nights a week at the Marlowe Room because invitations did not erase rent. Graham Holloway adjusted around her schedule like a man discovering gravity did not negotiate. He sent no flowers. She had once called them decorative pressure. He sent no jewelry. She would have auctioned it out of principle. Instead, every Tuesday and Thursday, a plain paper cup appeared at rehearsal check-in labeled Elena. Oat milk latte. Half sweet. No note. The first time she asked who brought it, the receptionist smiled. The tall problem in the navy coat. By the 3rd week, Elena stopped asking. Inside the rehearsal hall, old fears waited in the corners. The conductor was exacting. The orchestra was world-class. The mirrors reflected every doubt with professional clarity. Elena could still play brilliantly, but brilliance and confidence were distant cousins. After one difficult run-through, she lowered the violin and whispered, I cannot breathe in here. Graham, who had been permitted to observe from the back row only because he had donated chairs and then apologized for it, walked down. Quietly. Then let us leave. I cannot leave. I have rehearsal. I meant for 5 minutes. They stepped onto the loading dock behind the hall, where city air smelled like rain and traffic ambition. Elena leaned against the brick wall. They all stayed in motion. I stopped for years. So what? Graham said. Do you know how many executives I hire who never stopped moving and still go nowhere? She laughed despite herself. That was oddly comforting. I am broadening my portfolio. She looked at him carefully. Why are you so calm? Because I have seen you perform terrified before. It looks identical to talent. Back inside, she played cleaner than anyone that day. Nolan later claimed the conductor glared at Graham for smiling during a cadenza. Graham claimed that was impossible. Nolan claimed he had witnesses. The night before the benefit concert, Trouble arrived wearing polished shoes. Victor Sloan, Elena's former manager, appeared at the Marlowe room with a tan too expensive for honesty. He spotted Elena near the host's stand and spread his arms as if redemption were scheduled. Elena, look at you. Trying not to, she replied. Victor laughed weakly. Still sharp, Graham, seated 3 tables away, set down his menu very slowly. Victor leaned closer. I hear about the concert. Congratulations. We should talk. There are unresolved rights issues with old recordings, promotional claims, prior representation. Elena's face went pale, then still. Graham stood. Is there a problem? Victor turned, recognized money instantly, and smiled the way smaller predators smile at larger ones. Private business. Then conducted elsewhere, Graham said. You do not represent her. And you are. Someone who dislikes opportunists with spray tans. Victor bristled. Careful. I usually am. Elena touched Graham's sleeve lightly. Do not. He looked at her, then stepped back at once. Trust meant obeying boundaries even when angry. She faced Victor herself. You used my mother's illness to trap me in contracts I never saw. You borrowed against my name. You lied for years. Nearby diners had become statues with cocktails. Elena continued, voice low and steady. You do not frighten me anymore. Leave. Victor scoffed. You think one concert changes anything? No, she said. But saying no did. Security arrived with excellent timing and better posture. Victor was escorted out, still talking to no one who mattered. Elena's hands trembled only after the door closed. Graham noticed and said nothing foolish like, are you okay? Instead, he asked, walk? They crossed midnight streets in soft rain until they reached a small park lit by lampposts and puddles. Elena sat on a bench, breathing carefully. He used to decide everything, she said. What I played, what I wore, who I met. Then when money disappeared, so did he. Graham sat beside her, leaving respectful space. He does not decide this. I know. My body just has not received the memo. He nodded. Bodies are conservative investors. She smiled through tired eyes. That joke was terrible. I am emotional. Standards drop. Silence settled warm this time. Elena looked at the skyline. What if tomorrow I fail publicly? Then you will join the rest of humanity. And if I freeze, I will be in the front row looking supportive and expensive. She turned toward him. Why do you always know how to make me laugh when I want to panic? Graham answered more softly than he intended. Because I pay attention. The city hushed around them. Even traffic seemed farther away. Elena reached for his hand first. That is dangerously effective. Should I stop? No. She intertwined her fingers with his and stared ahead as if the skyline required supervision. Graham. Yes. If tomorrow goes badly, do not fix anything. Understood. If tomorrow goes well, do not take credit. Cruel, but fair. She squeezed his hand once. And if tomorrow changes my life, he waited. Stay nearby. The next evening the concert hall glowed with chandeliers, tuxedos, gowns, and expectation sharpened by rumor. Backstage, Elena adjusted the shoulder of her black performance dress and listened to the orchestra tune. Her pulse raced. Then a stagehand handed her a paper cup. Oat milk latte. Half sweet. No note. She smiled for the first time all day. Out in the front row, Graham took his seat as the lights dimmed. Looking less like a billionaire than a man who knew exactly where he belonged. Some victories arrive with confetti. The important ones arrive with silence first. The concert hall dimmed until only the stage remained lit in warm gold. Rows of donors, musicians, critics, and curious strangers settled into expensive stillness. Programs rustled. Coughs were suppressed with discipline. Graham Holloway sat in the front row wearing a black tuxedo and the expression of a man who had negotiated billion-dollar deals with less tension than this chair required. Beside him, Nolan leaned over and whispered, "If you grip that armrest any harder, you will own it." Graham did not look away from the stage. Speak once more, and I will donate you to science. Nolan smiled proudly. Then Elena Whitmore walked into the light. No server uniform. No apron. No borrowed identity. She wore a simple black gown, elegant enough to honor the room and plain enough to honor herself. Her hair was pinned back. Her shoulders were steady. She carried the restored violin Graham had kept until she finally accepted it 2 days earlier with the words, "Temporary custody only." The orchestra rose slightly in respect as she took her place beside the conductor. Somewhere high above, chandeliers watched history correct itself. Elena lifted the violin. For one heartbeat, fear touched her face. Graham saw it. Then she looked toward the front row. He placed a hand over his heart and gave one small nod. Not command. Not rescue. Just presence. She smiled once and began. The opening line floated clear as winter air, then widened into something richer, warmer, fearless. Strings behind her answered. Woodwinds joined like light entering stained glass. Elena moved through the concerto with precision sharpened by every hard year she had survived. Passages once used to impress now sounded like truth. Fast runs sparkled. Slow phrases ached beautifully. The hall leaned forward together. Critics forgot to judge. Donors forgot to perform interest. Graham forgot himself entirely. By the final movement, the orchestra chased her joy and barely kept up. Elena played not as a woman returning to the stage, but as a woman choosing it on her own terms. When the last note rang out, it seemed to hang above the audience, asking who they had been before hearing it. Then the room exploded. Thousands rose at once. Applause thundered from balconies to parquet floor. Several musicians struck bows against music stands in approval. The conductor turned and bowed to Elena first. She bowed to the orchestra second. Then, with visible hesitation, she looked to the front row. Graham was already standing. He was clapping harder than etiquette allowed. Tears surprised him by existing at all. Nolan saw them and murmured, "This is premium gossip." Backstage became chaos in silk and tuxedos. Invitations arrived. Agents appeared from elegant corners. Reporters requested statements. A European festival offered summer dates. A streaming platform wanted documentary rights by midnight. Elena thanked everyone and moved through them calmly, as if weaving through tables at the Marlowe Room. Then she slipped into a side corridor and found Graham waiting near the loading door with 2 paper cups of coffee and no speech prepared. "You left the crowd," she said. "I prefer the artist." He handed her 1 cup. "Oat milk latte. Half sweet." "You remembered. I built an empire on data retention." She laughed softly, then grew quiet. "I almost ran before walking on stage." "I know." "How?" "Because I almost ran from the front row." She stared at him. "From what?" "Wanting something I could not buy." The corridor fell still around them. Elena set down her coffee on a crate marked lighting cables. "And what was that?" Graham took a breath rare enough to be valuable. "You. Your trust. Your time. Whatever version of your life has room for me." No one had coached him for honesty. It showed. Elena stepped closer until expensive confidence became irrelevant. "You arrogant man," she said gently. "You took long enough." Then she kissed him. Not for the room. Not for a camera. Not as reward. It was the calm kiss of 2 people who had finally stopped misunderstanding each other. When they parted, Nolan was standing 10 feet away with both hands covering his eyes badly. "I cannot see anything," he announced. "But emotionally, I am devastated." "Leave," Graham said. "Already doing charity work by leaving," Nolan replied, retreating. 1 year later, spring returned brighter. On a tree-lined street in Manhattan, a renovated corner space buzzed with children carrying instrument cases larger than their optimism. Above the door hung a simple sign, Whitmore Holloway Arts Foundation. Inside, lessons were free. Scholarships were real. Coffee was excellent because Graham had hired professionals after failing repeatedly. Elena moved room to room correcting posture, tuning strings, and telling nervous students that mistakes were proof of courage. Claire Whitmore sat near the window, healthier now, knitting scarves no one had requested. Graham emerged from the cafe counter wearing an apron that cost too much and handed Elena a latte. "Half sweet," he said. "You are trainable," she replied. A small girl nearby tugged Elena's sleeve. "Miss Whitmore, is it true you used to be a waitress?" Elena glanced at Graham. "Yes." The girl pointed at him. "What was he?" Graham opened his mouth. Elena answered first. "A work in progress." The room laughed. Graham wrapped an arm around her waist and kissed her temple with practiced gratitude. Outside, the city hurried past as cities do. Inside, music began again. Some men throw money to be noticed. The lucky ones learn to offer respect and stay long enough to be changed. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share this video, and let us know where you are watching from. And please subscribe to When He Chose Her channel for more powerful and emotional stories like this. Your support helps us bring more inspiring journeys of love, dignity, and unexpected connections. Stay with us, because sometimes the quietest people change everything.